Greetings, everyone. Don't mind the mess. This tends to be the room everything gets dumped into, and I'm the only one who cares. So I actually had a whole conversation with just myself earlier because I realized I hadn't gone live. Yay! Make sure that YouTube is muted. It should be. Yeah, it's cool. Hi, Danielle. Glad to hear that you're not watching while you're driving. Be safe out there. Don't know if anyone else is here. I think it's just you and me. Oh, well. Okay. So I've been going over the history trying to see if I remember this correctly because I'd like to talk about the Halifax explosion, but I'm going to wait till we get a few more people in here. I got my crocheting, lots of crocheting, making a second basket for my youngest daughter's saintly teacher who's managed to find some funds to get her some glasses. Because while we do have universal health care up here, apparently eyes and ears and teeth aren't covered, which I've never understood, but we'll just go with it. This is actually the second basket. She apparently really likes owls, according to Caitlin. So I made this basket, and I made eyes to go on the basket, but they're huge. So now I'm just going to make a bigger basket to put these eyes on, and I'll make smaller eyes to go on this basket. Hey, Robert. Good to see you. So I'm making a bigger basket, and it's a little rough to work on because it's two strands of yarn at once, and I keep getting them tangled, and it's fun. Two, one, two, three. So this is their two. I'm doing increases. Yeah, we went to the eye doctor today, and she definitely needs new glasses. In fact, she's going to have to start wearing them all the time, whereas before she only needed to wear them when she was watching the smart board at school or whatever have you. But no, now she definitely needs them all the time. So she's going to be getting them for school. This pair is going to have to stay at school because the school is paying for them, or a charity through the school board is paying for them. But she does have an old pair of her sister's she can wear at home until I can afford to buy her glasses for home. I hate being poor. It's no fun. Hi, Tijuana Mama. How's it going for you tonight? Ooh, we're getting a few people in. So for those people who can respond, and I understand Danielle is listening and lurking, so she shouldn't be responding. She's got to drive. Um, who here knows anything about the Halifax explosion? Is this going to be completely new ground for everybody? It's kind of an old disaster. It's not one that any of us have lived through. On Fairy Bunny. Is that a DAC? The name sounds familiar, but it's not registering a image in my head. I'm sure it's pretty. I'm not surprised it's not taught all that. It's taught a fair bit in the Maritimes, but where you are, it's probably not as well covered. You're way the heck the other side of the other side of the country. So and it was a long time ago. It was towards the end of World War One, so it's not exactly living memory for anyone anymore. I'm going to show a video which was my first introduction to it about the history of it once we get a few more people in. Because I know there was a bunch of people who said they wanted to come. I don't know if they're going to, so I'm going to give them a few minutes. I don't know if they still had them on the air because I haven't had cable in like forever. Do they still have those heritage minutes where they have like a commercial that's like a bit of Canadian history on TV anymore? Does anyone know? Anyone? I don't know. They did in the 90s, but I'm not sure if they're still on the air. If that's still a thing that happens. It's kind of cool because you got things like some of the Irish immigrants who came to Canada and how they didn't want to take on names of their new adoptive families. They wanted to keep their Irish names, which is why even in the deepest, darkest parts of Quebec, there are a lot of very Irish last names because they held on to their heritage from their country. Um, what's some other ones? I think there was one. There's there was one on mapping the brain with the lady who has the seizure and smells burnt toast, and they're literally poking around in her brain trying to figure out where the spot is that triggers that smell of burnt toast to see if they can fix it. Lots of really cool little things they had in those heritage minutes. But they're all about either Canadian icons or Canadian history and that sort of thing. I'm kind of a history nerd. I like history. Give it to quarter after, and then I'll play the video. But yeah, that's pretty much what we did today. I hung out with the kids and then we walked down to the eye doctor because I don't drive. Fortunately, I live in a small town where just about everything's walkable. So walked down to the eye doctor and got Caitlin's eyes looked at and got her glasses ordered. And by the time we were done that, my husband was done work, so he gave us a lift home. And Emily didn't go with us, but she's a teenager. She's old enough to stay home by herself. So 2, 3. This yarn is so soft, you guys. But I have so much of it now. Yeah, I spent 4 or 5 years living out in the Maritimes. So I didn't live in Halifax, but I lived in Prince Edward Island. So we did learn a bit about things from out there. Oh, my girls. Should I post? We've got 4 people watching. That sounds about right. Okay. Shift 6. Trying to get it set up. I don't use StreamYard near as much as I used to. Oh, okay. Share screen. Let me bring up the right screen here. Share screen. Share screen. I want that screen. Share system audio. Hopefully you'll guys be able to hear this. And my computer's going, no. Got it. Okay. Okay, so this is how I got introduced originally to the Halifax explosion, was this little heritage minute. These were literally just commercials that were played just like any other commercials might be in the middle of things. So this is a little commercial of Canadian history. Let's see. Let me know if you can hear it.
Oh my God! Look at that!
Yeah, thank God she's a half a mile away. Huh?
She's loaded, boys. You gotta get out of here. It's full of explosives.
Children, come on.
Oh no! Don't get out of here, Vince!
We're back in the school.
Please get these children out of here. That ship is gonna blow. No!
Mr. Coleman.
Hurry! Hurry! We gotta get these people out of here. That ship is gonna blow.
Are you guys hearing this?
What? People, get out of here! It's gonna blow up! Mission ship on fire. Stop train. Please, God, answer.
Coleman, there's no time.
The train's coming in towards Pier 6. I gotta warn you.
Come on, Vince. Come on.
There are 700 people aboard it. I've got to stop it. Come on, acknowledge.
Halifax was devastated. 9,000 wounded, 2,000 dead, including Vince Coleman, dispatcher.
Yeah, so I don't know if those historic minutes are still being shown on Canadian TV, but those were all around on TV when I was a kid. And that's the kind of thing that we get, is just little bite-sized bits of history. But that's one perspective. As you can kind of get from the little video, this took place in 1917. So this is outside of our memory. This is during the First World War, towards the end of it. December 6th was when this explosion happened. So, but it's an interesting bit of history. Okay. So, let me zoom out here a little bit. So we've got North America. We've got the eastern seaboard for the US over here, and we've got, oh, I need to actually have it on the map. So the eastern seaboard of the US over here, and Prince Edward Island here. The yellow dot is where I am. We're just going to ignore that. But at the time, this island up here was not part of Canada. This is Newfoundland. Newfoundland didn't join Canada until after the Second World War. It was 1949, I believe. So at the time, Nova Scotia, and in particular Halifax, which is this little city over here, was really the last major harbor before you tried to take ships over into Europe. And Halifax is built on a natural harbor. So in 1917, the world's gone to war. A lot of ships would end up coming to Halifax as basically their last port of call, where they can fuel up, they can get whatever else they need, they can gather together in convoys so that ships carrying things like uh, food and other supplies would be able to pair up with a few military ships and cross the Atlantic in a large group, which would discourage enemy fire from the Axis powers. Because that happened. Best way to get somebody to decide to surrender in war is to starve them out. That's sort of a thing that happens. So Halifax all of a sudden became this huge important town in the middle of this war, because the US troop ships and US supply ships would stop there. Supply ships would come over from Europe and pick up fuel and that sort of thing, and then head down to maybe further south, where they would load up with grain, come back up and refuel, join a convoy, and then head over the Atlantic. So this fairly small town suddenly had this influx of about swelled up to about 50,000 people towards the end of the First World War, this is 1917. Now, because the fact that they were at war was always a problem, there is a military base down towards the end here, which you can't see. There's military base. Where is the military base? It's someplace. It exists, I promise. There was a military base here, but it was decided that in order to keep U-boats or German U-boats from entering Halifax Harbor in the middle of the night when they couldn't reliably spot them, was they would put this netting across the opening of the harbor. So they'd put netting up across the opening of the harbor so that nobody could come in or out at night when it was harder to see. So on the 5th of December, night fell and they put up this stuff, and a munition ship called the Mont Blanc, which is a French munition ship, which was loaded with explosives. Not all of them well stored, but it was just full of explosives. In order to go into a harbor like Halifax, they had to fly a red munitions flag. I think it was red, but they had to fly a very obvious flag so that everybody would know when you're going into a populated area that what you have on board is dangerous in case something happens, like there's a collision or a fire on board or whatever have you. So he would know to stay away because it could explode. Well, because they didn't get there in time, they decided that if they kept their munitions flag up and there were enemy ships around, that the munitions flag would make them a target. So they decided to pull their munitions flag down and leave it down for their own safety overnight. And I don't think anyone's going to really blame them for that. That makes sense. We can understand that. Also, all the way back up here in the harbor, like right up towards the top of the harbor, there's I can't remember what nationality it was. I think it was one of the Nordic countries, Sweden, something like that, the Iwo. And they had more normal supplies, food, clothing, that sort of thing, for helping out. And they were really hoping to go join this convoy that was going to be leaving in the morning, but they didn't get loaded in time to leave Halifax Harbor before the netting went up. So first thing on the 6th, like 8 o'clock in the morning, the sun's finally rising. It's December. It takes a while for the sun to come up. They lower the netting, and both of these ships decide they need to get out of this harbor. They need to move. So the munition ship is coming in. The munition ship is coming in. It's coming up the harbor, and it gets towards this narrow part. And about the same time it hits this narrow part, and you can't see that, this narrow part here, which is literally called the Narrows, the Iwo is coming down, and they hit the Narrows, and there's only really enough room there for two ships to get by each other if they stay in their own lane. Now, No one's really 100% sure who was in the wrong lane, but the ships were coming head on to one another. And at least one of them was going too fast. There are certain regulations where you're only supposed to go X number of knots when you're going through this harbor. And so neither one of them wants to slow down. Neither one of them wants to move out of the way. There's a lot of testosterone going on. And one thing leads to another. And all of a sudden, these two ships collide in the Narrows. I think one of them did try and sort of swerve out of the way a little bit, but they ended up colliding right in here somewhere. So you collide two big metal ships, and immediately there's a fire because sparks going everywhere. There's stuff on decks of both of these ships that's somewhat flammable and everything else. Normally, if a munition ship caught fire, everybody would see the flag that's up and go, oh, shoot, we need to move away. The Mont Blanc never put their flag back up. They went into this harbor without their munition ship flag flying. So everybody's heard this, all of this blasting of horns back and forth between these two ships that were trying to basically outmaneuver one another in this area. And now there's been this huge, loud crash. And as you do, big crash, what happens when there's an accident? People start filtering down towards the harbor. They start filtering down towards the harbor, and they start filtering down towards the harbor. People are coming out on there. Different other ships that are in the area see, oh crap, there's a ship on fire. They start loading up smaller boats to go out and try and help the ship put out the fire. And the crew of the Mont Blanc, this is about 8:30 in the morning when this happens. The crew of the Mont Blanc is freaking out because they know that they have stuff illegally stored on the ship deck. Normally, a munition ship has to keep all that stuff down below, but they have some picric acid and a few other things that are highly flammable and explosive that are stored on the ship deck. And so they're both desperately trying to say, no, you don't need to get close. We're a munition ship. You should stay away. But they're saying it in French. And while a lot of Canadians can speak some French, they're freaking out. They're not speaking clearly. There's a lot of noise going on. People are yelling back and forth. It's a blustery December day. They're not being heard. And so they're trying to split their time between trying to wave everybody off and trying to get this fire put out before it gets to the munition stuff. And they quickly realize after 4, 5, 6 minutes, they're not getting this fire under control. And they're like, if we don't abandon ship, we're all going to die. So they do. They get into lifeboats and they abandon ship. Some people so there's this huge crowd gathering up on the decks and on the ship side. And whenever there's an accident, there's always looky-loos. So people are coming to the windows of the buildings that are facing the harbor and trying to kind of see what's happening. And they're doing one of this. And they're like, Colin, what's going on? And like in the video there, two people from the railway did hear that this is a munition ship that's on fire and realized how bad this is. And that did happen. He was about to try and evacuate the city. And he's like, no, we've got a huge passenger train that's coming in. I have to stop the train. So he does actually go and telegraph the train and get them stopped. And for that, he is still regarded today as one of Canada's heroes because he didn't take the time to evacuate himself. He instead gave up his life to save everybody on that train. So everybody's crowding near windows and they're all coming down to the docks and nobody's staying away. And all of a sudden, at 4 minutes after 9, the Mont Blanc explodes. This was the biggest single man-made explosion ever when this went off. It was only eclipsed by the H-bomb that got dropped on Hiroshima. This was a big deal. All of this area of Halifax basically got flattened. Like, it knocked over buildings like they were made out of cardboard. It knocked over power lines. There were live wires everywhere. You couldn't tell where the streets were because the buildings had literally just fallen over. It looked like it had just gotten flattened. And no one knew what to do. Nobody knew what happened. People were deafened from the explosion. One of the major injuries that happened because of the shockwave from this explosion, it shattered glass as far away as Truro. Let me zoom out a little bit and show you where Truro is. Truro is 100 kilometers away. Truro is all the way the heck up here. Yeah, it was heard all the way out. It was heard all the way to Prince Edward Island. Like, everybody heard this. This was an enormous bang. And it flattened most of Halifax. So many people died. It actually emptied the harbor bed. You could actually, for a moment there, you could actually see the rocks on the bottom of the harbor bed because it sent this 60-foot tsunami out. It washed over 3 blocks worth of what was left of Halifax and washed all of those looky-loos out on the piers of Halifax into the water. There are people who we don't know if they died in the Halifax explosion, and we'll probably never know because their body's probably out somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. That's just the way it is. But yeah, can you imagine all of a sudden your town has been flattened? If you've survived, which a lot of people didn't, this killed over 2,000 people, you can't hear anything because there's been a large explosion. You were probably standing at a window and this is shattered glass. A lot of people had eye injuries or became visually impaired because of this due to flying glass. You can't hear anything. You can't see anything. You don't know what happened. You're not sure if you're under attack because this is wartime. A lot of people assumed that this explosion was an attack. The military base is freaking out because there's now fires from downed power lines and broken gas lines in the military base where they have more ammunition, and they're like, crap. So they ended up getting as much military as they could into Halifax to evacuate those survivors that they could because they were afraid of a second explosion. And this is the 6th of December. I know not everywhere gets cold. Believe me, it gets cold in Halifax. There's snow on the ground. This is getting cold. They don't know if there's a second explosion. They're not sure exactly what happened. Some people who saw the burning ship thought maybe that's what happened, but nobody had ever seen an explosion this big. They didn't know what was happening. They assumed that they were under attack, that this was some sort of a German attack on Halifax. But either way, 25,000 people are now homeless, 2,000 dead, 9,000 injured, many of them horrific injuries. And there's a blizzard that's going to hit tomorrow. And they already know it's coming. So what do you do? Well, not unlike 9/11, not at all unlike 9/11. As soon as everybody heard about this, everybody went, what can we do? How do we get there? We need to get there. But Halifax is in the middle of nowhere. There's a reason why this place was so well prized for this purpose, is that it's the last stop before you go out to the Atlantic. So if you're going to get help from, say, Ottawa or Toronto, it's going to take a while to get there. But what I remember most about the aftermath of this explosion was that it was the US that came to our rescue. Boston is not too terribly far away. So as soon as they heard down in Boston, they literally grabbed everything they could. They'd already had large amounts of supplies and trained nurses and stuff that were going to go over and help in the war. But instead, they loaded everything that they could. They loaded temporary shelters, medical equipment, medical supplies, all of the train staff that they could, loaded them on a train and got them there before the blizzard hit. And they set up temporary housing. Several ships that had been outside or nearby Halifax actually came back into Halifax and took some of the people that they could on board, so they would have some place to be. I mean, lying below decks on a ship without much more than a blanket doesn't sound like much fun, but it'd be better than being out in the middle of a Canadian blizzard in December after a giant explosion. Uh, so, and like, there were ships that came in from every country you can think of. There was all of this outpouring of help from Maine, from New York, from Massachusetts, all of the nearby states there that got there before things got snowed in from this blizzard that hit. And eventually, places from further away, like help from Ottawa came, help from Toronto came, but it took a long time for Halifax to recover from this. And they got so much help, like the people who came to help, especially in those first few days, seeing all the horrific injuries, they had to have some mental health counseling. And this is 1917, when like mental health wasn't a thing. They had to have some mental health counseling for the trauma of dealing with all of these heavy trauma cases from the horrors of this explosion. And they just got so much help. Boston in particular was one place that sent so much help that to this day, and we are over 100 years later, Halifax goes out and finds a giant Christmas tree and sends it by rail down to Boston for them to light up as part of their main Christmas celebrations, in remembrance for how much help Boston sent to Halifax because they needed it so badly. And like, this had to be organized in no time flat. Basically, Boston heard, as soon as Boston heard, they went ahead, jumped in a train, and didn't think about it, just went. And everybody dropped everything any way we can help. It is so cool. I mean, the whole thing sounds utterly horrific. Nobody knew what to think about that. Nobody knew what to think about this. And to this day, you can go to Halifax, and there are memorials all around Halifax. And there are these giant cinder block buildings that were built shortly after that in order to house all of the people who were made homeless, because it flattened blocks. The anchor for the munitions ship, the Mont Blanc, and if you've ever been near one of these big ships' anchors, like they're person size, they're huge, was found over a mile away. Over a mile away. That blast was so big, it hucked this huge anchor over a mile away. Like, it was no joke. It was literally the largest man-made explosion in the world until the first atom bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. And I think it remained the largest non-nuclear explosion for a great number of years. And I think it's been eclipsed now, but it's still high up there. And it always surprises me that nobody knows about this. I mean, if you're from that area, you know about this. I remember it because I was taught about it in school, but a lot of people don't know this ever happened. And they don't know how much the world was at war. There was like a whole war going on that we were involved in, and yet everybody in the area pitched in and came to Halifax and helped in any way that they could. And it was absolutely amazing. And Halifax hasn't forgotten. Another interesting fact that people don't realize is the Canadian National Institute for the Blind, the CNIB, was founded shortly after this explosion because so many people had facial and eye injuries that they had to figure out how to help people who could no longer work, could no longer do their jobs because they couldn't see or couldn't see well. So one of the largest branches of the CNIB is in Halifax to this day because that's why that was started. And it's been a help to anyone who's been visually impaired ever since. So it's a pretty amazing tale, and I love history for things like this. Things that are a little more obscure that people don't know about. It's really amazing what you can find when you start digging into it. And I don't know if I have anything more about that. But yeah, no one there was never any charges filed. Or there were charges filed. I think the crew of the Mont Blanc were arrested, but there was never anyone found guilty for anything that happened. I think a lot of people were just in shock. Um, one of the things that I remember about this was when they were trying to deal with the fires and everything in Halifax, they had literally one pump truck for the entire town, and it had been on its way over to the fire in the harbor and had been destroyed, and the fire chief had died in the explosion because they were responding to the fire in the harbor. So yeah, they didn't have much in the way of police, didn't have much in the way of fire people, they didn't have any other fire trucks, and now half the city is flattened. So, yeah, it's a pretty amazing story. And Diamond Queen is here, and she just missed all the story. I guess you're gonna have to catch that one on replay. But yeah, it's a story that's always stuck with me about how everybody comes together in a crisis. Yeah, it does show up on some disaster shows. I have noticed that. Like if you look on when that comes out, like there's Fascinating Horror did a piece on it, and when you hear about other explosions, sometimes it gets mentioned, but it always surprises me how few people know about it. That's all right, Diamond Queen. We're just glad you came. There was a bunch of people who are going to be here, and I haven't seen them. You have to poke Brandy later. If this is going to tell me that I'm live, no. Let's wait and see if that was the hey, you're live. Did you know? It's like, yeah, I'm the one who's live. Thanks. But yes, we were talking about the history of the Halifax explosion. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, Diamond Queen. I know I'm live. It's amazing. I know this was probably a little early for some people. 7 for me is quite early for some people, depending on where you are. And apparently only had about 15 minutes worth of storytelling in me. But the short version is there was a huge explosion in the Halifax harbor that flattened most of the city. Halifax is on the East Coast. It was the last port of call you had before you had to then trudge out into the Atlantic Ocean. And at the very end of the First World War, there was a huge explosion that leveled most of Halifax. And there's a lot of very interesting stories about how places like Boston just dropped everything and sent help, and how to this day Halifax sends a enormous Christmas tree to Boston as a thank you for all the help that they got due to the relief efforts for the Halifax explosion. And that the Halifax explosion was the largest man-made explosion ever up until the bombing of Hiroshima, and remains the largest non-nuclear explosion, man-made explosion ever for a number of years after that. It's a big deal And yet it seems like unless you're Canadian and happen to be from that part of Canada, you don't ever hear about it, which is why I wanted to talk about it. So what are you guys up to? Are you just getting in from work, Diamond Queen? I've been working on owl baskets. I've got this one that I finished. But when I made the eyeballs for it, the eyeballs are way too huge. So I'm now making a larger owl basket to use these eyeballs, and I will make smaller ones for this one, making them as a gift for my daughter's teacher, who's been helping us out a lot. So, and this yarn is so soft, you guys. Just so soft. It is tent sail worsted, which is put on by the tent sail put on by Spin Right every year. They're having the big ball tent sale in May, and then they're having like the full tent sale in August. And like, so this was $4.50 for 6 balls this size, and it is so soft and so cheap. Now to see if I can make wearables out of it after that. Getting a budget is good. Got to have a good budget. Of course, then the hard part comes is sticking to the budget and then adjusting the budget where you realize you can't stick to it. Is that the beast, Manny Manzano's beast? I thought about getting that one, but money. Beauty and the Beast is one of my favorite Disney movies. I don't think that's a controversial take. Yeah. Making the budget actually can be easier than actually sticking to the budget. The hard part is revising the budget after you've tried to stick with it for a couple of months and gone, okay, well, this part's working fine. This part's okay. This part's really not working. It's just not cool. And it's hard to do that because it means eating a little bit of humble pie when you're like, oh yeah, we can keep the entertainment budget down to $20 a month. We'll be fine that. And you realize, no, you really can't. You thought you could, but you can't. So you have to then adjust the budget to make it work for you. And yeah. And you have to be honest with yourself. If you know you're going to spend the money, you either have to figure out how to work it into the budget or you have to figure out how to get around spending that money. And sometimes it means making cuts where you may not want to. And sometimes it means, you know what, it's okay if I treat myself on Fridays to that. Oh, yeah. Yeah, everything's going up. Everything's going up. It's so bad. I had to swallow my pride today and go and get my daughter fitted for glasses I can't afford. Her teacher has gotten her a caring, how did they put that? A caring grant from the school board to get her glasses because she needs them. Yeah, it's depressing. We have 4 people in this household and I can't afford new glasses for any of us. So, but I had to do it. I had to take her and get her fitted and admit to them, it's like, yeah, I'm not paying for this. This school is, and the teacher's going to pay for them and take them with her, and they're going to stay at school. And she's just going to have to suffer at home because the school is paying for them. The glasses have to stay at school. Like, yeah, that's not embarrassing at all. if this is the way it has to be, this is the way it has to be. I did have a good interview yesterday. It's with a charity. It's with actually a conglomerate that deals with a bunch of different charities. It's outbound calls, which I'm less thrilled with, but it's outbound calls to existing and former donors. So we're not calling random who's it and asking them for money. We're touching base with them and finding out if they want to continue their donations, if they want to increase their donations, letting them know things that we're doing. So I think I can do that. They're definitely better on the abuse side. Not only do they not permit their employees to be abused, and we do have the ability to hang up on people who are abusing us, but they also will report any donors who are abusing to the charity that we're working with so that they will be aware, because they don't want to foster that. That's not okay. All right, Robert, thanks for coming in. I hope you learned something. It's always good to see you. So I shouldn't have any more major issues with that, because it's like, oh, it sounds like I've caught you at a bad time. Perhaps we'll call back another day. I will let you go. No, I'm going to let you go now. Bye. That's much easier to stick to. And they're hoping to hire, I believe they said 5 people, and they will let me know on Friday one way or the other. So that's always nice. I hate it when you interview with somebody and then you hear nothing. Nothing at all. You put in application after application and radio silence. Not a word. It's like, thanks. You could, just mention that you've hired somebody else, or yeah. No. Apparently I'm not worthy of a mass email. Thanks. Appreciate it. Made me feel good about myself. But yeah, it's got to nerd out for a minute on my history having. Maybe the rest of them will catch it on replay. I don't know. I get pretty nerdy when it comes to history. I find it very fascinating the way things go. And I liked how Kara got into the whole thing with Gander and 9/11, where she was talking about how all of the planes landed at this old international base and how the people of Gander took them in and made them feel at home during one of the worst days of their lives. Concerts are starting back up again. Oh yeah, you're working security, aren't you? Yeah, I was watching Last Week Tonight. John Oliver did a whole piece on how terrible Ticketmaster is and how much of a chokehold they have on the industry. You're doing that and working at Amazon? Damn. Unfortunately, fuel prices don't bother Brian and I too much. He doesn't have a very long commute. In fact, he could walk to his current job, but he's going back to the golf course, and that's a bit of a hike this week. Tomorrow's supposed to be like 18 degrees. That's 18 degrees Celsius, which is, I think, 60s, if not 70s Fahrenheit. So it's going to be a really nice day tomorrow and Thursday. So he's going to go back to the golf course. And usually the first few days are picking up like down branches and getting things cleaned up. So, but he's hating working inside. He does not like working inside. He's sort of it's sort of a factory / warehouse floor. They put together memorabilia and they ship it out. And he sweats to death. It's even when it's not that warm out, he's he's a furnace. He's great to cuddle up with on cold nights. I'll tell you that. But yeah, he wears shorts to work, and his coworkers make fun of him. But otherwise, he sweats to death. He'd much rather be outside, even if it's cold. So he's going back to the golf course. But the golf course and this factory warehouse place are owned by the same people. So they offer anybody who's working at the golf course, once the golf course closes for the season, they can go work over at Mustang. So that's always nice. Because otherwise, he'd have to go on employment insurance. And we have done that for a number of years. But not having to do that is so nice. Because trying to get money to the government is never fun. It's always a pain in the neck. It's gotten better. I remember the first few years before they allowed you to net file and do it that way. That was a pain in the neck. We've been together 25 years, so we've had a lot of years of doing this. But he's really looking forward to being back in the golf course. Very much. And I can't say I blame him. It's what he enjoys. Just like I don't want to go outside. I actually went outside and I walked all the way down to the eye appointment today. I was very impressed with myself. It's not as far as I used to walk to work, but I got out of the house, so that doesn't happen too often. Had to be done. I brought another thing I'm working on for crocheting. I'm doing these really great bibs for the babies that are coming. And they're actually more toddlery bibs. They're meant for when you're feeding baby food. So they're not really going to be great for the newborn phase. But they've got a nice color on them. And they come out to the shoulders and then go down to about belly level. So they actually cover everything. I used to hate those bibs that had like this much material at the neck because she would always get stuff down her shoulders. She'd like rub her face on that sort of thing. Drove me nuts. And these bibs are like full coverage. They go like down to here and then down. So I'm working on that. Every time I'm like, ooh, I can do this project. Or, ooh, I can do this project. There's so many projects, you guys. And my mother just keeps going, you need money for yarn? Okay, have money for yarn. Go buy yarn. Enjoy. She's the one who tried to teach me to knit as a child. So while I never did learn to knit, I learned to crochet, and she's happy with that. So since she can't knit anymore, because knitting is kind of hard to do one-handed, she's like, oh, you need yarn? I can get you yarn. We can get yarn. We can go squeeze all of the pretty yarn. Yes. Bonding over yarn. All right, guys. I think I'm going to call it here. Thanks for coming out and listening to me ramble. Thanks for indulging my nerdness. And I will leave you to go about the rest of your day. Thanks for watching. Bye.